I guess we decided that after the last meeting that we would meet today and talk about anything in the whole book and the whole budget that we had questions about, concerns about, etc. So who wants to start off? Or maybe there aren't any questions or concerns.
Hello.
Hello, Holly.
Oh, good.
Oh, good. Do we
We're all
want to go
glad to
through,
see you, Holly.
do we want to go through by section or just call out your questions?
Whatever, whatever is anybody's pleasure. I only have a couple of questions. And they're all in the Public Works Department.
Well, and I
So do
only
you want me?
myself too, so.
Okay, so what is people's pleasure? Go through every section or just talk about the ones that we have particular concerns and interests in?
The second one, yeah. Concerns and interests. I
All
don't
right.
think we need to rehash every bit of it.
So Margaret, why don't you start out?
Well, mine was under the legal services. And again, it's the question on funding the engineering for the floodplains, the Loma. And if we're gonna do down street, we need to do, or if we're gonna do more and how to pay for that. And I just think it's not very equal if we just do a few people and it doesn't benefit everybody on that. Dave did answer my question about the outer islands, and there is nothing in there concerning anything but the Nathan's estimates were just for downtown and the main island.
Yeah, I think so. When Nathan gave us the memo, he had analyzed each of those transects
Yeah,
that are, there's 8 of them, I believe, around the island right now. And they didn't, when FEMA ran the model, they didn't put any transects on the outer island. So when he ran it, he analyzed each transect for what he thought, he might expect to see if they run their models. So if, by running those models, changing the models for those transects might in fact lower or make a difference on the outer islands, but there was nothing specifically proposed to create transects for the outer islands.
that's correct.
And that estimate to do an island-wide review, even the Main Street one, I mean, he kind of put a rough estimate in there, but he says it's so hard to know until you really get into it. But he put an estimate in there for island-wide, anywhere from I think 60 to or 75 to 100,000 for an island-wide review.
That's right, yeah.
Main Street was I think somewhere between 15 and 20 or 25 maybe.
15 and 20 rings a bell, but that was also, he did it last year for that estimate, so. I just bring it up because I think it still needs further discussion than just having it in the budget without funding where it's going to be funded and how many people it actually impacts.
Yeah, so I think, the intention was that this be the discussion, through the budget committee, in part we got the memo like almost not quite a year ago. And we had that community public meeting, if you will, virtual meeting with him on it a couple weeks back. And,
Yep.
I think looking at it, he estimated, he was trying to count the number of buildings that were in the floodplain, just looking through aerial photo imagery. One of those things that our GIS database, if it had a buildings layer, would be a really effective tool for analyzing that. But I think he was estimating 300 parcels. I forget how many buildings he thought was in that floodplain, but I'll say there's 300 parcels, I believe.
But I think if we set the precedent that we pay for it for Down Street, then it's gonna be pretty hard to have people around the island pay for the $100,000 estimate. And if that's even gonna be pursued. We're setting the precedent right now. And because
Yeah, I
there's only
agree.
16 people impacted down street, or that was the sea level rise number of businesses down street, buildings, not individual businesses. To talk with them and see whether or not they would be interested in helping fund that, because it costs individually be a heck of a lot more.
Yeah, I think the property owner that did it most recently went through that, a multi-year process by the time you start and finish. And I think they said they paid close to 30 grand.
Yeah,
And so if each property owner's having to do all that same level of work, you know, that would be substantial for any one of them.
absolutely.
You know, I think that Margaret has a point too. People who it isn't reviewed, whose properties aren't reviewed, they're going to be a little, you know, you're going to have some explaining to do. They're not going to be happy when they come in and see that a part was chosen. Maybe their property now is in the floodplain, but maybe it wouldn't be. It seems like there's going to have to be some picking up of a mess, maybe.
Yeah, I agree with you guys 100%. You know, it's not fair that we just do, like you say, a few people in town and then leave the rest of the people hanging to do it themselves. Should be all or nothing, I guess. My opinion.
Yeah, or make a plan, say, you know, it's going to be a 3-year project or however many it would take to not blow the budget out to do it all at once.
Well, that's where Nathan took the liberty to do an island-wide proposal too, because we started just asking him about the Main Street piece. And he said, you know, they've got the model already created, so, you know, it wouldn't be, I mean, it's obviously a lot more to add that much more, but, you know, there's gonna be a certain amount, every time you have them go back and do another section, there's gonna be some of that is obviously gonna be borne in the paperwork and some of that initial stuff that's gonna be borne every time, as opposed to if you did it all at once, you might save a little bit more, might pay a little bit more by doing it in pieces, because, you know, they're gonna have to add on that much more each time.
Well, I just think that we need to approach the people it affects and ask them to put in some percentage and have that be a set precedent, because if we just fund it, then we need to do the outer islands, every island, to make it equal to all taxpayers. It doesn't sit well. Not some investment in it.
In your mind, is there a certain, if it cost 100 grand to do, is in your mind, is there a certain percentage you feel the town could or should pay for, and then hope to get the remaining percentage from the property owners or other means?
No, I'm just trying to eliminate well, why didn't I get mine and why isn't mine lower? And I'd like to have mine reevaluated. It's just gonna, as Lucy said, it's just gonna open up a can of worms. If we don't have it specific of who's gonna be affected. If Nathan can identify 300 people, those 300 people should be asked how much they value it, and then come up with a number if it's worth it. 1,000 for that is, I mean, I think it would be useful too. I just think that it's, I mean, there's certainly over 1,500 houses, residents on the island. And that's a small fraction. I mean, it's not half. Just my opinion.
While we're on the engineering page here, I did just today get work orders from Worden and Curran on those preliminary reports. The North Haven Road Vinyl Cove project, to preliminary numbers on that. They put a price of 29,500.
Holy Hannah.
Wow.
Lucy sent along a grant opportunity, and I think, was that through Nature Conservancy?
No,
And
it's
I-
through, I can't remember. I think it's through the, oh,
NRCS?
maybe it is. I'm sorry. I can't remember. I'd have to look. Maybe it is. I thought it was in maybe the Natural Resource Council of Maine, but
The one I was trying to remember. And so I'm wondering if we ask them potentially for help paying for the report, the engineering report, to help cover that. I mean, the board wants something done there, and this is the first step to identify what we might do and the cost to do it. So, I think getting it done is an important piece. It's just a matter of whether we think we can get the funding for it, and if not, that 29.5 was the estimate they gave us. On the High Street sidewalk one, the number for that, I believe, was 17.5. I got them right here. Sorry, 29,000 for the bridge, the culvert and road review. And so, sorry, just scroll down here. What they're proposing to do is this, the topographic survey, the geotechnical investigation, hydraulic assessment, and then this alternative analysis. It's kind of like, what we're going to see out of it. And so we can get an idea for, the culvert in the flooding. We can look at some sort of hydraulic restriction. The other piece, what I said was kind of a separate piece, is the fact that the road is sinking. And so what do we do about that section of road that is sinking? And so looking at the cost to reconstruct that section of road, and then the cost to look at doing both of those things, and then putting that together in a memo for us. So this is a big chunk of money is born in the survey work. I do have a file box on the table here that has a lot of information from before. And so there might be some good foundational survey stuff that they can use. Maybe some of the other stuff is included in there. So I want them to see it before, and it might be a modified work order. So it certainly wouldn't be more than what they proposed, but it's possible it could be less. But my thought was maybe we could get that grant funding source that Lucy shared to maybe help cover some of that.
I think with Pleasant Pond, I'm not sure about Down Street because it's natural resource based. So it's Maine Natural Resource Council program. They've got 7 million to grant for this type of thing. They're talking about trying to do some substantial work on culverts. And I think that because of culverts being undersized, ours is oversized, but they might really help with the science. They might be able to help. Someone might be able to help talk about Pleasant Pond as the natural resource that needs to be thought about as this is made. And then that might be able to get you the funding through this program.
And they were involved in that project 15 years ago.
Ah, well, then they ought to revisit it.
Yeah. Because I have it, the other work orders for the High Street sidewalk, the select board, back in the fall, wanted to see us make improvements to the sidewalk before the year ended. This year ended. I did look at it with a couple of folks out here, and it became pretty clear we're going to have to include the engineers when you look at the drainage issues, the ADA compliance that we have to be in tune with. And I asked them to look at High Street, from the fountain over the hill back to Main Street. There's two, both sides of the hill are designed very different in terms of drainage. One side's got a series of catch basins and culverts. The other one's kind of an open ditch for most of it. And both sides need substantial work. Neither side is anywhere near the width it's supposed to be. And they, again, both need a lot of work. Crosswalks need to be sited better. So I suggested if we're doing this, let's not just do one small section of High Street, but let's look at a design that takes all of High Street, and we can choose whether we do it in segments, the actual work, but let's at least get a design that looks at the whole thing, and then go from there. So they proposed to do just phase 1, all the preliminary work, which would give us, include the topo survey, preliminary design, and a probable construction cost. Phase 2 and 3 isn't included in this proposed cost, but they could come back and work with us. They would come back and work with us on a construction document, and then help with the bidding process. But to do the preliminary work in designs and surveys, it's $17,500. That's, and to me, that's something that would be, it's necessary to kind of be able to get us off the ground. It's something that we could just look to say, do you want to just take that from fund balance? This legal services and engineering pieces, I was proposing that's where they come from anyways. Just go up to the summary page. You can see I proposed to have that come from fund balance as it was.
Mhm.
So, it's certainly possible that if approved, we could also just add that extra to come from fund balance as well. And that way it's not impacting the tax amount. And if we get grant funding to do either of them, any part or whole, all the better.
Mhm.
So would you be taking from the sidewalk account? Would you say fund balance?
No, the undesignated fund balance. Currently the sidewalk account funds are earmarked for a match for the Main Street project. Using that in the road repair lines to leverage the improvements for that. So if all the grant funding comes through as we're aiming to get, we wouldn't have to loan any of that project. We'd have the cash to match the grants that we would get that we're applying for to do it without loaning anything. But it does put both those lines at zero at that point. But that's in part why we have the funds. I mean, a $4 million project, if all we have to do is, use the cash on hand and not loan it, you just start saving again for the next project. So the board's earmarked and committed those funds if the grants come in to be able to match those. And there are proposed appropriations in this budget to put money back in those funds.
You're proposing to add the 26,000 difference in what we have in this paperwork right now, to increase that line 26,000 more, because those estimates we were only holding 10,000 for those two projects.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and of course, included in that's $15,000 for the flood mapping piece. Depending on how the committee feels about that one.
But you're thinking of it increasing that to 26,000 to keep those two others in the Vinyl Cove and the High Street.
Correct.
26 more. $61,000.
Maybe you could get the Star of Hope Foundation over there, gazillions of dollars to cover that cost for Main Street.
Well, I think to the point that Lucy or Margaret was bringing up, I mean, are there ways to look at, private contributions to do certain sections or help contribute to all of the costs for the island-wide review? And it just comes down to, whose property has to pay what share kind of thing, or, I'm not aware of too many grant sources out there that we could go get to just do a flood map challenge. Unless we can tie some other sort of adaptation process or project to it, which is just making it way too big. So it's, if it's not done through the public means and taxation, then you're only left with the privately raising it. And it's just whether we want to, maybe the only role we serve is this kind of facilitative role and say, we'll help be the staff component to shepherd it through with the engineers. you know, or there is a contribution and some private funds, or all public, so.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, kind of worms, like Lucy said, because then if you start dissecting the wealth of some of the ones on there, especially the one that owns 54 and the, you know, Chet and Cheryl's place.
Mhm.
So then you're trying to sell that to the working class people that you paid
Mm.
for their, you know, when they certainly had plenty of money enough to do it themselves. Not everyone there, but I mean, would the federal government kick in because the post office is there? Or not?
Possible, they
They
don't.
don't own the building.
I know, but Diaz, I don't know if he still owns it, but he used to.
Have the Board of
What-
Selectmen talked about this particular issue at all?
I mean, we've talked about it, and we hosted that virtual presentation and question and answer with the engineer that put the memo together. You know, but we're at the stage where it's being proposed in a budget, you know, for a certain amount, and this amount would probably get us Main Street, not the whole island. So we're kind of at the point now of the board would like to see at least part of it done. Some of, and they haven't taken an official position on, you know, whether the whole or part, but it's been talked about. Some would like to see all of it. Some would like to see, you know, just part of it, for the same reasons you brought up. And so it just warranted further discussion. So I thought this would be one opportunity to hear from the budget perspective, you know, what your position on it is.
Well, my perspective is with the increase of 26,000 for the other two projects, which I think we should definitely do because they definitely need engineering. I do wonder if it was going out to bid, whether those numbers would be that high, but because we have a contract with them, we're sort of there. But if we paid for this part of Main Street, then there's certainly no way you're gonna get private money out of those people if we've already agreed to pay for it. If it's in the budget.
Right, and if it's not in the budget, then it's either a special town meeting or it waits a whole nother year. That's kind of the calendar, you know, issue, that's all. And that's not saying it should be one way or the other, just the reality of it.
But I think if we set the precedent that we're paying for Down Street, then we're not gonna be able to build the users around the island for the $100,000 one. So
Well,
I think it's worth waiting another year and looking at how to fund this big picture.
that was the question, the reason I asked the question earlier about, you mentioned a certain percentage, and, you know, is there a certain percentage, you know, in general that you might feel the town could put forward, that's reasonable, and say, okay, we'll put forward, you know, say 5 or 10%, and we need to find a way to get the other 90 or 95% kind of thing. And I don't know if that's anything worth considering or not, but.
I think it's worth considering because it certainly is an advantage to the town to do it. And I think other people just need to be aware of it. And if they're not paying for it or even know it's happening, then I think it's important to educate the people that it's going to affect. Or we agree to pay for it in full.
Right.
No, we had this discussion last year and, you know, if we had more manpower, that could be dealt with, but in talking to people on Main Street, I know it's a lot of work doing that.
Well,
What's
there's a good possibility that we've got maybe 3.5 years of the present federal administration. Biden's proposing a $3 trillion infrastructure bill, and if the Republicans are successful in controlling voting levels, as you know, something like 40 different state legislatures are trying to pass bills to do that, it may be the last time that the Democrats are able to win an election. And so hopefully some of that money could trickle down to Vinalhaven. But we need to be ready to make a presentation in the next 3 years.
What's the presentation?
Well, projects that we want to get completed and with, some sort of federal funding. Glean out of the whatever size infrastructure bill Congress ends up passing.
I don't think we're gonna wait 3 years. I think I'm gonna start this year trying to find it.
No, I'm saying we've got about 3 years, a little over 3 years, and then that may be the end of it. So yeah, I agree. We should get going.
Get it while the pork's out there.
Well, we got a lot of projects we've been talking about needing to do for a while, and we've been 2 years now at trying to find funding for the Main Street project, and we've got what they call shovel-ready projects in some cases, and so that's what they want to fund, is those ones that got the support and they're near ready to start, so they can stimulate things. So I think we're sitting pretty good on a couple of them. Unrelated to this part of the budget, we have a sewer department and entity that is also facing a fair amount of upgrades and component replacements, because it's at 15, 20 years old, 15 now at least, and so it needs to have some of its components replaced, and that's another one that we're kind of keeping an eye on as well, because the small amount of users that there are can't support the near $1 million of improvements. So yeah, whether it's that or these other infrastructure projects, we're definitely going to try and find it.
Well, maybe you can just report, Andy, to the select board, these concerns that were raised, and that if we're setting ourselves up for having to do the whole island. And do we want to, at this point, as Margaret suggested, try to find some funding from the People's Shore that is being done? And see if the selectmen what their take on it is, if they see it the same way.
Okay. So in terms of the $40,000 that's in there as a proposal, is there a position of the committee to modify that amount, keeping in the 15, or moving the 15 and adding the 26,500 for the work order numbers we got? Margaret, you're muted.
Margaret, you're muted.
I do that all the time. I would to put in Vinyl Cove and High Street and table the 15,000 until we can figure out what the select board thinks of it and talk about the total island precedent we're setting. But I would like to add the other two.
So that's that 51,500.
Yeah, the 56,000 to it, that was the, instead of the 20, it's now 56,000 for those engineering. So it's 26,000 more.
All right. So
But
that's
taking out the 15 until we have a better resolution.
okay. Noted. What's next?
Lucy, did you have some concerns, Lucy?
Let's see. Jen Ann, how about you? You were about to speak.
No, I didn't have anything that I wanted to question. I think most of my questions were answered when we
Okay.
did the presentations.
The transfer department, thinking about the whole fee structure and how far behind we're falling, and those were shocking statistics about daily trucks in the summer. And I just wondered if there isn't more creative thinking about getting some money maybe from people rentals. If people rent their houses, do they have to pay a fee, an additional fee? I don't know. It just seems to me that we've got this big spike in the summer and there's so many people that are renting and so much more increased trash because of, people, the house is full all the time. I don't know. I just throw that out there and I didn't know if anybody's given it any other thought on how we might increase fees at the transfer station, especially in the summer, or increase intake.
Well, would our own garbage bags, trash bags solve part of that question?
I guess that was one of the things on the table.
Yeah.
Which I agree with. I just wonder if there isn't some way to, and maybe that's wrong thinking to try to target the time of year, sort of like the ferry, when increased use.
Well, without being discriminatory or having the perception that it might be, I mean, the cost in the summer do increase, right? Because the ferry boat prices change. So the idea of and we have to add on sometimes additional help at the transfer station to keep up with the demand. So we could certainly look at the possibility of a peak per bag rate. The question, Lucy, what you started with is, the rental part. I mean, it's a fee per bag, right? You pay per bag. So as long as they're going in during the open hours and actually have their stickers and, are able to actually say, hey, I dropped off, X amount of whatever and pay for it. As long as our system is set up to collect that, they're not skirting the system. They're paying their share. But there are slightly higher costs that time of year just because of the extra staff and ferry boat tickets.
Do they sort? Is trash sorted as much in the summer as it is the recycling at this time of year, or do people more just throw it all in the bag? Or do we know?
Yeah, I don't know if that's a seasonal thing or not. We haven't done a waste audit. That was one of the things that we'd like to see done as a waste audit.
Mhm.
We were thinking more so from the perspective of composting and organic material. Like, is there a way to divert? I mean, our biggest cost savings would be to send less stuff on the boat.
Right.
It's about $1,000 per truck, regardless of how much weight's in there. And then you got to pay for the amount of weight in it. And so, is there a way to stop sending so much off island? And that's where the composting program kind of came in. Compacting the recyclables helps get a few more trips with, or a few less trips with more weight in it, essentially. Other things we could think about doing, which I think I had on here, were finding a way to compact and keep dry the demo load, because that's just an open, not covered by any means. And so anytime it rains, snows, whatever, you get more weight added to it, which doesn't help us on the scale side of things. And it's almost, I think, about $80 a ton. I think there are 70 or 80, somewhere 75 to $80 a ton. If you're paying for extra water, I mean, it doesn't make sense. So there's some small things we can do to kind of help with the cost there, but in terms of, what's in the weight in those bags when people throw them, we don't have a good sense. They did it years ago, but it's been quite a while since we tried to do one of those waste audits.
Go ahead, Jan. Sorry.
Well, I was just wondering how the prices on these bags was arrived at. I mean, is that just all you think that the traffic will allow, or is there some correlation to what ends up in the load? Because those prices frankly seem pretty small. And maybe we could manipulate the bags for recycles. Figure out a way to encourage people to recycle what's in that bag rather than throw it all in the trash. I don't know. Just trying to think how to do it, but if what I guess I'm asking is if this increase is going to give us enough to really deal with the increase.
Well, yeah, I think part of it is getting to a point where, what is the goal? I mean, is the goal still the same? I mean, at one point, early on, when the landfill was capped, my understanding is that the goal, in charging fees was to try and cover the increased cost at the time, which was to remove waste from the island, before it was just put in the landfill. So this new cost at the time, so if that's still the goal, it's been many years, 15, 20 years since that's been capped. Close
20.
close to 20.
20 plus, I got done in 2000. Yeah.
So we know there were quite a few years where the prices haven't changed. And so, we kind of obviously got in prices for the contracts go up every year a little bit. So we obviously didn't keep up with that. And so step one, I guess, is to still see, do you want to get to that recovering that cost? And I added up those lines of removing waste from the island, the trucking, the tip fees. It comes up, it's proposed about $255,000 for next year would be the cost to process and remove waste from the island. So is that the number you want to try and get in revenue? If so, then you start breaking down the different waste streams. We know what we have been getting collected. We don't know necessarily if or how much, or I guess how much isn't collected by off-hour disposal or even during the open period, because the way it's set up is just kind of at times very chaotic up there, and you might not get everything. So some of it might, just not being collected just by design. Some of it, again, off-hour disposal. I think that's probably more than we realize. And you can look at the bags, that's probably the easiest thing to put a number on, because it's a bag, whether it's a sticker or a certain color, you pay for the bag up front. The other stuff is bulky and loose, and we do have fees for it, but it's less measurable. It makes it hard to really hold it accountable. I mean, they think they do a good job with what we have, but without scales, it's kind of a game. But I mean, again, it's less certain.
It is a game. I mean, the bags will be good, because then you take away the pressure for the employee to look at a truckload of stuff going in the garbage and saying, okay, well,
did it have a sticker?
This is what I'm going to charge you. Same way with the demo and stuff. The human factor is how aggressive, by God, if you had Bill working there, I'm sure we'd have a surplus, But
I think another important thing is recycling. There's never been charges for recycling, because it had been a revenue for the people taking it, right? The processing places made money on recyclables. Well, that's not the case anymore. It hasn't been for the last probably 5 years. And so it now costs almost the same per ton to get rid of recyclables as it does to get rid of solid waste. And in fact, in our case, probably a little bit more, only because you can't put the same tonnage in those containers. It's not off by a lot, but that you can't put the same tonnage in there. And the price fluctuates depending on what they sell each month. The way EcoMain is set up, it does fluctuate in terms of what we get charged. And so you're starting to see now some towns having some sort of fee for recycling. Not proposing that happen in my budget, but just letting you know that mindset of you don't charge for recyclables isn't necessarily staying constant in every place right now.
Wow, I think that's a step backwards. We haven't even got everybody trained to recycle. Let them starting to charge them for it. I'd rather pay more for garbage than charge recycling, but
So,
Yeah, at one point,
well, my question was, is recycling, is that the single stream?
yes.
Okay,
When the Waste Watchers started out a few years back, one of the things they put in place and have expanded a little bit is the composting program. And early on, the thought at one point, was let's look at it in a couple of years. If there's a way to divert for people to put their organic waste in the composting pile. If there's a way to have recycling, you know, do you put a higher premium on the solid waste, the bag, the sticker fee? Because now we're providing other options to not have to put stuff in the bag and put it over the log. You know, that hasn't been reconsidered. The composting program has expanded a little bit, but it's not like a full blown. We don't have a good sense of how much more could go in it. You know, so I think that's another thing to think about. Other, you know, to what I think Margaret was asking, are there other ways, or Janine, are there other ways to encourage people not to have to throw it away? You know, if it doesn't have to leave the island, you know, that's the way. Having that waste audit, I think, would be really important, because if you look at averages, you know, when the state's done a waste audit and other places do it, they on average show 30% or up to 30% by weight in that trash bag you throw out is organic material. And if you can remove 30% of the weight out of those compactors, that's almost 200 tons, if we're average. You know, if it's a little bit less, you know, so be it, but it's potential for up to 200 tons on an average that could be diverted to an organic composting program. You know, and 200 tons over, and you spread that on an average of 13.5 ton per trip, and about $1,000 per trip. It's not an insignificant savings. It's the difference between the 255 and the 233,000 almost.
So Andy, is that actual, what I would call garbage, compostable material that's getting put into those bags?
That's the assumption. You know, when
Yeah.
you do a waste audit, you get into a bag, right, and you pull out what's recyclable, what's organic material that could be composted, you know, and then on average, 30% by weight could be composted. They find generally, not for here, but we have to do one for here still.
Yeah,
Is
there's
it-
zero compostable material in my trash bags.
Mine too.
Me too.
Well, of
Zero.
course, we're all very virtuous, but we can't count on that from other people. And it seems to me, again, that this is a reason to raise the cost of those bags. Is if they cost more to throw away solid waste, and you can put it in the recyclables and in the compost for nothing. Hello? I just feel like the cost of those bags is way lower than it needs to be. And this is a way to catch all that extra garbage in the summertime.
The bad part is some of the folks out here won't pay it. They'll just dump it along around the island road and other places.
Right.
Well, that's always, I mean, you're always going to have people like that.
Right.
So what do? You just give up?
No, I don't think you give up, but I do think just from what I notice, people dropping stuff after hours, you could recoup a lot of that. It would be a huge dent in this. Wouldn't eradicate it, but it'd be a huge dent.
Well, we
But,
talked
you know-
about cameras and so forth to kind of keep an eye on stuff that was going on there. We also talked at one time about a scale to weigh this heavy stuff. What happened to that? Did we just say it was just not cost effective or what? I know that there was a problem with the path that the trucks would have to go.
We have the cameras. The scales are a much larger endeavor, and we got some quotes on it just to purchase the scale system. The in-ground one, I think, was in-ground or above ground. The scales you would drive up on, I think, were ranging anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000 before you paid someone to actually install them. And we don't have the depth to put an in-ground one there, or the length on that property to put an above ground one.
Yeah, and the other thing is that those scales, particularly the above ground ones, are very sensitive. So if you have a vehicle drives up onto it and then stops really quickly, and sort of skids or something like that, it can jar that mechanism. And so I remember when I lived down around Portland, Cape Elizabeth had a terrible time with drive-on scales with people, and you have to get they have to drive on twice. They have to drive on
Right.
loaded and then
And
they have to
full.
drive to get a tear weight. So it takes a lot of room and somebody there to monitor it,
Yeah.
you know, a person.
Eric, you had a.
Yeah, I mean, not everything dropped off after hours isn't paid for. Some people have it stickered. Some people go in and then tell, Kenny and Luther what they had. And as far as the garbage, they said the same thing once we started charging when we went from a 24/7 open dump. But we were aggressive about going after people when they dump garbage, because most of the people left mail in their garbage bags and everything else. But that was my job, to go all over town, because I worked at the dump, to get the info and turn it over to the deputy. So, and it worked pretty well after we had people fined for littering.
Yeah.
And with our increased police coverage, they can make it their habit to swing by the landfill when it's closed. It'd be their beat.
But then what
And
are
I
they
think
supposed to
we
do?
definitely need to support the waste watchers and put up the shed for having people reuse things, because that keeps it out of the garbage as well.
Yeah.
It certainly is an important aspect. It'll keep things out of the demo, because that's where stuff goes if you can't recycle a couch or something that somebody may want. They got their work cut out for them to keep it clean and organized, but they're willing to take it on.
So we do have waste watchers?
There's a committee, yeah.
There is? I thought we disbanded last year.
Oh, no. I
No,
think
they're
it's
pretty
remote.
active. They want to start the swap shot up again, so I think it,
Okay, well, I guess I got disbanded out.
Maybe. Just sitting in the box, you haven't seen it yet.
Yeah.
Well, I had a couple of things. One is, do we know how much other communities, particularly like Portland, which is doing bags, their own bags for a bunch of years, how much they're charging per bag?
I don't know what Portland charges per bag. I know we've looked loose, generally into other communities. I don't have a list to be able to show you who pays what, but it's something that could easily be gotten. I don't know if we'd want to, other than just to be interested to know, I don't know if we'd want to try and compare ours to Portland, but maybe only as a reference.
Well, it would give us a good idea of whether we're charging way too much or as Janan suggests, maybe way too little.
Well,
Rockland does it. Rockland has bags, and so does Lincolnville and Camden. They all have bags. I think it's somewhere around $253 for those bags.
but their cost to run their services matter, right? The goal is what, as I mentioned before, like what is the goal to raise what amount? Because depending on what your costs are, I mean, you see what our budget is for transfer station for this community. It's over $400,000.
Yeah.
250,000 of it's just the cost to get rid of stuff. So I mean, other places might be higher, but when you look at our population, you look at our cost, I mean, that's a big number for a small community.
Yeah.
Some places have, they don't have any service, and they say, there might be a pickup service, right? And there might be a way for community members to, hire someone to come pick it up. For us, it just there's not really any other option but to have the transfer station and haul it out. So it does get a little tricky just to compare without knowing those particulars, but at least I guess you could get a sense for it. But I'd be more interested in knowing, like, what is the goal to raise what percent or amount?
Well, I don't know if we could go after a goal, but I think we should try to maybe fund a percentage, which I guess would be a goal also. But I think we need to tighten up, like increase it, get the bags, increase the price if we need to a little bit. I think we need to cover the demo container, and I think we've got to take some of the loosey-goosiness out of, Luther saying, oh, well, I guess that'll be $15, you don't know what's in there, and maybe he doesn't either, but and you don't know how much bias is. Maybe they're friends of his, or who knows? It's terrible thing to put on his shoulders, to make those kind of decisions, I think. And the other thing is, the limited amount of times I go up to the transfer station each week, I see a lot of returnables going into the single stream. Now, a lot of it are cans and plastic that don't weigh very much, but there are a lot of wine bottles that go in there too. So I'm putting in a kick for elder care to be able to start collecting up at the transfer station again. We have people who are willing to do the pickups, and someplace there's a rub there. I don't know whether it's Kenny, because he feels like it jams up the alleyway to the single.
We can talk about this, and maybe not as a budget meeting item, but as a procedural thing, either with me or the select board, and come, figure out when we can implement that again. I don't know if that's a budget related.
Well, it directly affects the weight that goes into that single stream compactor. Not a lot, but some.
Well, I think that we should look at the goal of what we want from it, like you suggested, over the, make that a mission for the next budget year. But I agree with Joanne, if you make that bag price higher, people will put less in it, whether they compost it or whether they recycle it or they give it to their neighbor. There is an
Well, think about it.
alternative. Yeah, just think about it.
Have we tried a campaign, back in the wind, or posters and stuff around town to most people don't realize how much this is costing the town. I mean, if they saw some of these numbers on this, they would really, I think they'd stop and think. When the recycling really changed a couple of years ago, people were really excited to actually go up and try to do a better job. Maybe they've just gotten complacent again, but most people don't realize what this town spends on this.
Agree.
Yeah, I agree
But a
too.
lot of them are looking at what they spend. That's their big concern. So if you got the loosey-goosey system and they're not putting much money in it, they're thinking this is a great system, because then the rest of it comes out of taxation, and who pays most of the taxes on the island? So.
Any questions within the budgeted proposed amounts anywhere?
The transfer station? Andy,
Yeah, yes,
within the transfer station section is what you're talking about, asking about.
correct.
Okay. None here.
No.
I also wanted to circle back to the CEO LPI. We talked about permit fees. Did we need to make a recommendation if we think to help have some additional offsetting revenue to raise the permit fees? And also, I think that maybe some planning for planning board members. I mean, some training, some budget money for some training for people who feel that they wish they had a little more training for that position.
Yeah, the select board was hoping to get to a point where 50% of the cost of this department could be paid for through revenue of permit fees.
Mhm.
And there is a training amount available. And we did just have, I think, 4 or 5 between the planning board and the Board of Appeals go through an MMA training within the last month. So
Oh, great.
with COVID, some of those trainings are now more available. We can absolutely make that an opportunity, if it's virtual, if it's not, if they eliminate the virtual part of it anytime soon, we can look to bring someone out here and offer the training in person. So that's
That's great.
supported. And then the revenue part, yeah, I mean, again, the board took a similar approach. If we can get 50% of it covered, and that was the hope for last year.
But Andy, the proposed budget, it's more than 50% revenue. It's
Okay, we can lower the permit fees, or
No,
I don't know.
I think the goal last year was for 50%. The way that the budgeted amount shakes out and keeping the same amount of revenue, yes, you're right. It is more than 50% would be covered.
Yeah, that's probably because there's a 5.7% reduction in the overall cost this budget. So anyway, I think we're in good shape there.
Yeah.
We're meeting the expectations of the select board.
Well, and that was last year. I don't know if they would change their mind this year, and I don't know if you guys have a different take. If 50% seems fair, I mean, when you look at what generates the cost of the expense of the time commitment for the position, how much of that is following up with permits and new construction and making sure folks are in compliance, how much of that is due to enforcement issues, how much of that is just general state required things that don't have to do with the applicant or a building project. I think the majority of the time is spent on permits and following up on permits, and being available to field questions whether someone submits a permit or not. So when you look at kind of like some of the other stuff, who should pay? Should it be all fees? Should it be less percentage of fees? But just to understand what constitutes the need for the time, you can start to think about, is 50% a fair number, or should 50% be covered by the general tax base, even if they don't use the service?
Again, how do we stand up compared to other communities of our size in the mid-coast area? Maybe we ask Faye to do a survey to
Yeah,
see.
we did a couple of years ago when we raised the price on it at that point, and we were on the low end of the average.
Yeah.
End of the spectrum, rather. And we went from, I think it was 10 cents a square foot to 15 cents a square foot on most of the general construction. That's one of the big changes that was there. And there were some places that were as high as 25 and 30 or even 40 cents a square foot in some cases. I mean, we've got people that, especially from other states, and it's not apples and oranges, but when they see what our permit fee is, they're almost like, yeah, absolutely, no problem. Some of the people, we had one person put in a house permit, but the difference when you try to compare them is we haven't adopted or been required to adopt the move back in the internal building and electric codes. So some of these towns, when you go to compare them, they've got higher costs because they got to cover more ground and permit and inspect more things. For us, it's the plumbing and the land use ordinance permits that we're following up on, the floodplain permits. If we have to add internal building, we'd be at the other end of that spectrum with the rest of them.
Well, until we do, I think we should at least be comparable or in the middle on with towns that are doing similar levels of inspection that we're doing. I mean, obviously Portland, Camden, Rockland, they're doing many more inspections in the building cycle.
And they're also all communities that have far more things to inspect than we do.
Yep. But I think we ought to at least be mid-range. So maybe it's worth checking again to see where we are with a few communities. Because realistically, all of the costs of that, I mean, all of the effort of that position, the CEO LPI, is based on new construction and permits.
Quite a bit of it is, yeah.
Do you think people who are in the building trades out here, do you think a raised permit fee would be accepted, or would people start getting annoyed that the town's overcharging?
I don't think anyone would be annoyed with an increase, but the increase would have to come with more inspections and more things to, like Andy said, more evaluation. I mean, in Rockland, I paid $1 per electric outlet in the house that we just remodeled over there, and $50 per plumbing fixture. But then you have to have a plumbing, you have to go inspect to make sure that those are to code, which we don't do the 3 inspections that they do. You get a certificate of occupancy. There's just a lot more that happens. And if there's one thing that I would like them to inspect or adopt here, would be fire code, so that you actually had hardwired detectors, because that's something that, that came from the fire chief, but it's inspected over there. And I think it does save lives. Easy to inspect.
Well, that's all I had.
Didn't someone have a question with Public Works, or is that the other thing we just did?
No, I had some questions with Public Works.
Okay.
I think the last meeting there was, the first item on the short-term budget is a lease an excavator. And I think it would be important for the Department of Public Works to make up a list of maybe other equipment, but certainly with excavators, so that we know who owns an excavator on the island, the capacity or size of the excavator, whether people would be willing to rent it out either with an operator or without an operator, and the cost per hour for leasing it, so that we know what is on the island. And so we don't have to pay, maybe we don't have to pay transportation costs and having the thing, get it out here and have it sit for a while the next project is being worked up. Whereas if we're renting by the hour of the day for somebody on the island, those costs of waiting around go away. So
The reason they proposed a lease is to have a little more control over the timing of the projects. And so, and by no means are we saying that we aren't interested in hiring local excavators or contractors to do any of the work. It's just there's certain times of the year where there's just not enough of them to be working the machines to do the jobs when we need them done. And so we've got a long list of ditching and other drainage needs that we've been trying to stay on top of, other road projects, culvert replacements, and so like this spring that we're planning on hiring someone to be able to do it. You look at the cost to hire someone to do it, and then the time restrictions they have to get things done or be available. That's where leasing it came as from the road commissioner and for me, as at certain times of the year, the best solution so that we have control over when we need to do those things. The challenge with assuming we can just rent one from somebody out here, as long as they've got all the paperwork and insurance needs and all those things that we're required to have on file to be able to rent from them, we can do it. That makes a lot of sense. We'll have to obviously train someone to operate their piece of equipment, and hopefully there's a backup for if that machine goes down and needs repairs. Some of those things are kind of built in when you can lease it from a rental company, but we're not unwilling to try and make that work if that's possible.
Well, I mean, there may be more excavators out here than people actually know about. Maybe is there a list of people who have excavators and the different capacities?
No, I don't believe that. I know I don't have a list in our office here, but I have a good idea of who has excavators and who we've hired and what their availability is. And that's, again, one of our biggest limitations is availability.
Uh-huh. Well, one of the things would be important, would also to be on that list to have people, if there's enough time. I mean, if it's the project is planned, then the person who is going to lease it would have time to make plans for that. So communication is really important. So obviously I'm against bringing something from the mainland if we can avoid it. Because the cost is, if we bring something out, if we rent something on a monthly, weekly, monthly, whatever basis, that thing's going to sit around between projects, guaranteed. And maybe we can avoid some of those lost costs by leasing something. Maybe with have it so that the person that owns it operates it, so that we don't run the risk of damaging somebody else's machine. And it frees up one of our operators to be doing something else.
So then you're basically doing like what we did years ago when we contracted Goog and his machine. So you're actually not leasing, you're just hiring a contractor.
Right. Which again, we're open to doing.
Right.
It just, in our experience, in the increased amount of work we're trying to get accomplished, has proven to be challenging to do it on a timeline that we need it to be done on. Yes, some of that comes with communication and doing better planning, but there's still an amount of work that we need done at certain times and should have the flexibility to be able to do it when we need to do it. And if there was a period of time in the general construction season that we could lease something, it also alleviates some of the stress and wear and tear on the backhoe to use a piece of equipment that's more suited for and more efficient to use on some of these jobs. It preserves the length of time we might own that piece of equipment.
Yeah,
I'm willing to bet that piece of machine is started up and used 5 days a week for at least an hour, sometimes all 8. That's not a lightly used piece of equipment. And, if having an excavator that we don't have to, especially if we don't have to own it, we can lease it for a certain period of time. Some of those maintenance and long-term issues we don't have to worry about, but we have the flexibility on some of those projects to just be able to do them.
Yeah. Well, I know that I think Luke Philbrook did some ditching with his truck and driver and his excavator on the Poor Farm Road either last year or the year before.
He did, and all at substantially higher, it was great work, first of all, but also comes at a much higher cost than what we would charge, it costs us to do it ourselves. And so we're trying to be fiscally responsible in that too, and balance the work product, workloads, work plans with the resources on island and in-house. And sometimes it makes sense to hire a company or someone to do one job and have us do another one somewhere else at the same time. But, those do come at a much higher hourly rate, as you might suspect.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. But we don't have anybody involved in getting a piece of equipment out here or and moving it around and all that stuff too. So I think it's just, maybe it just means that we need better to look at the planning aspect of the projects to see what can be easily done, with subcontractors, what can easily be done with the rental equipment.
Yep, that's the proposal that we put forward, I think, is to acknowledge some of those points.
Okay, well, I'd love to see that list when it gets done. The other question I had is the fourth item down is replace the 8,500 dump plow truck. And the idea is to replace it with a smaller 4-wheel drive. And I don't understand why we would replace it with a smaller vehicle.
Global warming, we don't need big vehicles.
I mean, we're not talking about a wheeler. We don't have a wheeler, right? And so when you're talking big trucks, we don't have a big one. but we have a Western Star, which is a 4700, which has got a bigger plow and a slightly bigger truck than the 8500, physically at least. I don't know about the power behind it, but it's a big truck. And so the question is, do we need two big trucks? There's certain times of the year, certain projects, we can't take the 4700 and the 8500 on. They're just too big in some places that we have to go certain times of the year. They weigh too much for certain roads and certain times of the year. They both require a Class B license. And that's not something that anyone can get into and drive. We've got two on our staff right now that have Class B licenses.
Who is that?
Two more that are trying to get them. I'll just say we have two people who have it and two that are trying to get it. So we don't want to handcuff ourselves to have a fleet of vehicles that aren't interchangeable among the staff. If we have to hire someone else to come in and help in the wintertime, same thing. We're handcuffed to have someone with a Class B or more to be able to drive those two trucks. And so the thought was save a little money, buy a good, a big enough smaller plow truck to be able to keep up with what it needs. But we aren't trying to find volume here in transport material and wheeler loads. So we thought it was reasonable to downsize that truck a little bit and not lose too much of it in the wintertime.
What are you calling a wheeler?
A 10-wheeler, something you would haul 15 or 18 yards of material in for
But
me.
we haven't had a 10-wheeler for years, have we?
I know, I'm trying to understand the question, I guess, in what you bring up about, I guess I just need to ask you, what is the concern, or what is your concern about going from an 8500 to a 650?
Because if you're taxing these smaller vehicles at 80-90% of the time, they wear out more quickly. Whereas if you're not taxing a bigger piece of equipment, but when it's needed, it will do more work. It'll last a lot longer. And I think if you have commercial driver's license people, they might tend to take care of the equipment a little bit more carefully. And if they're the only, one of the few drivers, then it's obvious who is mistreating equipment. And I've heard rumors, and they're only rumors, that's like some of this black pickup that's wants to get replaced is being used very hard in order to get rid of it. So, and I worry about that kind of approach.
I guess as former road commissioner, that big truck we're replacing was a mistake from the beginning. You don't only have to have a commercial, B license. It's a very hard, tricky truck to drive. Somehow we ended up with a truck that had a custom rear end, custom low gears in it. And if you're not careful, you brake on the rear axles. The amount of snow that we're dealing with in a regular basis, you really don't need the big trucks. And the only time you really be putting strains on them if the snowstorm gets ahead of you. On those big storms, you have the big truck, and then you have the ability to use the grader if you have the big 20-inch storm. The 1 tons are easy to drive for anyone coming off the street. Your extra help. To me, it makes sense. That was my idea when I was there, that when it came time to do it, that was what I was going to go with. And also, if you have 2 1-tons, at times we had problems. We'd have a truck that wouldn't run, but the sander would work, and the opposite. You'd have a truck that would run and the sander wouldn't, but they weren't interchangeable because they were different sized trucks. If you have 2 1-tons, as long as the hydraulics are rigged up the same, you've got that interchangeability.
So Eric, the 1 ton is the 650.
No, it's smaller than that.
Oh, what's the 650?
It's a size bigger.
So is that like a half or
We
something?
have an F-350 pickup. We have the GM or the 5500, the small dump. And then we've got this GMC 8500, which is the oldest truck we've got. And then you got the Western Star 4700, physically the biggest vehicle we own, biggest truck we own. So, I mean, when we bought that Western Star a few years ago, the bid price, the final price on that after getting it rigged up with plow gear, I think was $210,000.
Ah,
If the idea, maybe we can talk on the same wavelength here. If the idea is to replace the 8500 with a similar sized vehicle, we're looking at least 210. I'd say what we got last time, we shouldn't have skimped out on the plow gear because we paid for it. The difference in the price. We bought with the cheap option and we got cheap components. So, it's probably more like 220 if we went with the other company with the components. So if there's an opportunity to get an F-650, which we feel, Dan and I feel that could keep up with what we would use it for most of the time for $60,000 to $70,000 less. We thought that was a reasonable proposal to put forth.
uh-huh. And what is it? What is the capacity, like 1 ton of the 650? Does that have a number that goes with it, like a 1 ton or something?
I'm not fluent, I guess, in being able to explain that to you. It's bigger than the red dump truck we have. The size bigger.
So what,
And that's a 1 ton, the red dump truck?
Oh, it's a 5500.
yeah, that's the 1 ton. When you get talking that, it's how much material.
Right. I'm used to talking about capacity for material.
Right.
Okay,
That's why I brought up the wheeler. I mean, usually you're buying dump trucks to haul stuff, and we don't do a lot of hauling of material. We do small job sites and small loads of stuff. In an F-650, you're going to put a 6-yard body on there, probably 4 to 6 yard. In that 8500 we have is only taking, what is that one, 7 yard?
7 yards.
So I mean, you're not sacrificing a whole lot on the hauling because we're not doing a lot of hauling. We're looking at downsizing that truck enough that you're not sacrificing a lot in the wintertime. We don't travel at high speeds. We're not trying to clear highways. It's low speed type of plowing, and buying bigger trucks or keeping bigger trucks. I mean, we have to contract out some of our roads now because we can't put our big trucks down them. I don't, in between that and the Class B and everything else, that's why we put forth the idea for next year that we look at buying, replacing it with a slightly smaller vehicle.
okay.
And 2, with the 4-wheel drive, you don't have to, use the chains on them as much. With the bigger ones that aren't for that bigger one that was being replaced isn't. And you'd be surprised how expensive the chains are and how much it costs. They go through them pretty quick.
Well, not only do you go through the chains, after a full winter of using the chains, you're probably looking at replacing your tires because they bounce and chew up the tires.
Okay.
I had a couple questions on this as well, and mostly it's how much more of the equipment that we own can be undercover with the new public works building? And because you see the, like the hot patch, the sanders, those things sit outside. Will that stuff all still be outside?
Some of it will be able to go inside, but we're still not gonna be able to put everything inside.
Yeah.
The sanders are still gonna have to be outside. The hot box trailer probably could go inside in the new building. The small sidewalk tractor, I don't even know if it'll be up there, frankly, because you're still gonna want that downtown. We've got more room. The building that's up there is a 5,000 square foot building. The building we're in now, I think, was like 31 or 3,200 square feet. So we've got more capacity to store stuff inside, but no, not everything will be able to go inside.
So the other question I had was security, with upgrading equipment and tools and having tires and everything. Will there be security in that building up there in no man's land?
I just assume we put it in there. It's not, doesn't cost a whole lot to put camera systems in place for what you get out of them if something happens. But
I
we
don't
have-
see it in here. That's why I was asking. I don't know where it would be.
Yeah, I think part of it's waiting to see it, how much on the building budget there is, and, if we need to add it, we can add it.
Okay.
I think we can make it work within what we have. I mean, we wouldn't have to have something we can get remote. We wouldn't have to do quite what we did on the other buildings, unless we wanted to do a full outdoor yard view. Then you're talking probably some higher capacity and capable cameras. If the interest is getting it mostly on the inside, we could probably, buy one of those market systems and probably put it in ourselves almost.
Okay.
So we can look at it. I think we'd have it within our budget to be able to do it, whether it comes out of the equipment line or the supplies line. I mean, I think we could probably make that work. If we have to change gears and put a system like we did for the parking lots, I mean, that's a $5,000 or $6,000 expense. We would certainly go to the board to approve something like that.
Well, hope
but we
no
could-
problems.
Hoping we don't have to spend that much on it.
Yeah,
But again, it does matter what we want to cover.
yeah.
I mean, I had problems downtown with stuff being stolen, even spindle hitch for a dump truck, which is a pretty heavy, thing. And when I asked for cameras, the selectman just basically laughed it off, said, well, you aren't losing that much. In
I
some
just
ways,
worry
being
about
out
that
of town-
isolation. It's very
What's that?
isolated up there.
In some ways, being out of town there, someone going up there would stick out like a sore thumb. As to in the wintertime when you're plowing and the shovelers and the people going to the bar, filling up your parking lot, some ways being out there, someone would be more noticed
And there's
up there.
a series of gates to get up in there. After hours are supposed to be locked, down at the bottom, not the bottom of the hill, but as you get up to the top of that hill initially, before you get into the mill's pit, there's a big gate there now that, should be locked and closed after hours. And so if someone wants to get into any building, they're gonna do it anyways. But
Right.
there are some other things also in place that should keep folks generally, at least from driving in and hopefully taking the big stuff out of there. But I think we'd be able to put in a small camera system with what we have, budgeted already.
Okay, thanks. The last question I had was the generator. Because we have a whole island generator, I'm just wondering whether or not it's worth putting another piece of equipment that runs and has to be maintained. And we know they don't last anywhere near as long because they don't get used as much. Just curious whether or not we really do need it up there for the couple hours that we now are only out of power.
Yeah, I guess only something you can answer, yourself. We put it in there because we felt that, it is important to have backup power, because if the power's out, who's getting called out? Fox Line Electric and probably our public works crew, because there's probably a tree somewhere or something down somewhere. So from our perspective, we thought it was important to make sure if they're getting called into work during power outages, they not have to wait 2 hours for the power to be restored in the building they're going to be working out of, or having to get stuff from to go respond to something. It was just part of being, building in some continuity. I mean, there's generators in the town office, there's a generator at the fire station. I don't know why those decisions were made the way they are. I'm glad we have them though, because there are moments where, you're kind of left, okay, well, what do we do now? If you can't pump gas, if you can't even turn the lights on in that building, they aren't going to work. Right. And so whether we need one that big or whether you want to, can wire it so there's a smaller one to run just the bare minimum, but if you're not running the pumps for the water or the septic, I mean, you're not able to use that feature, so it's just a matter of, where we put a value on having that, I guess I call it contingency or continuity of service for them.
Well, I would agree.
I just know that the big ones cost an awful lot to maintain and they don't last anywhere near as long as they guarantee them to. So, I would
Well,
put a small one in for things that are very necessary.
I would agree that a small one that would, turn the lights on and pump the gas. But the trucks ought to be put away with fueled up anyway. So I don't know why they need to pump gas. And the
During
other,
storms, Bill,
what's that?
storms, when you're running the trucks during the storms,
Yeah,
you have to refill up multiple times. So if you had the big storm and you don't have the capacity to pump the diesel, then the trucks would, one by one, as they ran out of fuel, you'd have to pack them.
okay, so enough generation to run the pump and turn on a few lights and open the garage doors. Because it's ridiculous how little we have, how great our electric service is out here. I mean, it's, we're down for a maximum couple hours.
And if we didn't have the whole island generator, by all means, we'd have to run it ourselves, but we have that option and they keep well maintained up there.
Yeah, yeah.
How often do they actually use it? Because I know at times, well, I mean, if you're isolated, what if, the problem is on up more general where the garage is, not the whole town. They might not fire the generator up for that.
Well, the generator works well if it's not an island problem, right? If it's something off island, the generator can
Right.
restore power.
Right.
If you've got an island problem, you might have a phase out. And if you're part of that phase that's out and they're tending to the trees and they're great getting to it, but sometimes it does take a while. In some of those cases, we'll be right there trying to work with them or another part of the island for them. And, I hear what you're saying. I'll make note that, I'm assuming you think the 12 grand is too much for the generator, but to scale something that would run, I guess in what you shared, your bare minimum would be the pump and the lights. So
The doors.
and the doors.
But that's.
Well, I would rely on them to know, to tell what's necessary. I wouldn't want to say that from my seat because I don't run public works, but I would certainly, you could get away with a couple hours without the boiler running or whatever the heat is up there. They certainly need water and, there's certain things you need, but it's just a big number for a generator.
Yep, I agree. And I
How
would,
much I'm pretty sure, a friend of mine had one put in for his house. And you're talking, what, 7,000-8,000, maybe more?
Yeah,
Generator?
we estimated 12. The pump's a little bit, it's a pretty deep well in there. It's a 400 or 500 foot well. And then you got to pump down to luckily it's all downhill to the septic field, but you got to pump out of the tank down there. So I guess you could, if you want to wire it, to choose not to run those pumps during whatever outage, whatever length of time that might be. Obviously matters.
I would back up one item, also the front end loader on the first page of projects and goals. You show $25,000 for a used front end loader to load sand up at the Clouds Pit. On the next page, you show that front end loader at $50,000. So which is it?
I think it's closer to 50, but I bet you could find one at 25. Dan was put the 25 in there. You could find a used one, quite a few years old with hours on it for probably 25, but when I looked at it, it was closer to 50. That would be the range you'd buy a used one.
Yeah. Oh, boy.
Well, that's all of my questions.
And mine too.
Lucy, do you have any more?
You're muted.
You're muted.
I said, I'm fine. Thank you.
Okay.
And I'd just like to know the total if Andy has it there, of course, without the school, but
You want the total, the municipal total?
Yeah, what this budget's gonna ask for in the end.
And what would the mill rate be? Have you done that yet? Played with that yet?
Played with it. I don't dare try and suggest, offer it right now unless you want me to make a lot of assumptions, right? We don't, I mean, if you look down here, these totals, the municipal, we don't know what the bottom number is, the assessed value, because we haven't done all the spring work. It doesn't take effect until what's on the ground as of April 1st. So if you want me to assume no change in value, I can run with that and come up with a number. If you want me to run with my proposal, we know that the county tax bill is, we don't know what the school is, so I'd have to assume something for the school. I never want to assume it, what it'll be one way or the other than to say, until we hear a number, I would use the same numbers last year. The tip amount, obviously, you won't know entirely until the other numbers are finalized. The overlay, we try to keep somewhere in the 28 to 35,000 range, depending, unless there's something else that we know might be a problem, like any big lawsuit type things that are hanging over us. So, I mean, I don't think we're at a point where I can fairly give you a number.
Okay,
There's just too many big factors there that are unknown.
too many
right now.
holes.
But we can focus on what the municipal, proposed total is. That's the expenditure total change. It doesn't cover any offsetting revenue, so that might be a better sheet to look at.
You can make it a little bigger, yeah.
Yeah,
So that's like a second column in showing, what the proposed budget is, and then as you go along, if a revenue would offset
Grade 2.
any of those, some of those, again, have their own columns to show what those amounts are.
Do you feel like there's going to be a lot of new taxable buildings this year? Because it seems like a lot of buildings going on.
Yeah, I mean, whole houses you might not see the full value on houses that might have been permitted, because obviously it takes probably closer to 2 years to see the full value of those realized, maybe even 3 tax years, depending on when they start them. But there's certainly a lot of smaller projects that were permitted that are probably going to be able to get picked up. But when you're starting with $508 million on the bottom, even if you add 5 houses, unless you're adding, million plus dollar houses, it doesn't make a huge dent. But it will change some. The bigger change is going to be the homestead exemption. We have, last I knew, just anecdotally coming out of the office, there's probably anywhere from 30 to 50 applications that are new for homestead exemptions. Which is great, as people could qualify to have that. It's $25,000 off your assessed value. Well, that's $25,000 that would have been taxed times at the mill rate. The state reduces that amount of money from your taxable value and then refunds us 62.5% of that value. So we're losing whatever 37.5% of that off of taxes collected. So that gets redistributed into the mill rate formula to make up the difference. So if we get 30 of those back times $25,000, that's a pretty significant number. And again, it's great that people can qualify to get it. It's too bad it's not, frankly, more for some of these places. But that's going to be probably a big change the other direction on the mill rate number. Probably a bigger impact than the new value.
Oh, okay.
So these last 3, showing total revenue for each of those department lines at $711,000, $711,300. Proposing to use $313,000 from fund balance, leaving the total tax amount to be raised at 2.45, which is up 136,000 from last year. I know some parts we've talked about before, and In terms of other opportunities for offsetting revenue, we don't, just throwing it out there, the harbor account, I think it was $50,000 we're putting in that reserve for infrastructure improvements. The ability to replace the boat motor if that ever needs, when that needs to be replaced, at some point it will. And the question has come up in the past about mooring fees. There's no proposal in there to have them, but that's one that's often come up as a way to be able to fund that harbor reserve. And the ordinance changes, I think last year, were changed so that if there were to be fees generated from the harbor ordinance, it would go to the harbor reserve. But there was no proposal to actually charge anything for moorings or anything like that. But that was one that comes up, it seems, every year through these processes to talk about. It's not proposed, but perhaps some year it should be considered.
Yeah. The other thing I noticed, there's $50,000 for a new motor in the budget this year in the harbor section, and plus assistant harbor master. I did have one more question. Those were two things I didn't understand. 50,000 for the motor and do we have an assistant harbor master?
We do. I'm just trying to look quickly where you saw the engine replacement.
Maybe it was in that materials you sent, and I mistakenly thought it was in the budget section.
Well, it could be. If you saw it on a certain page, it's not proposed to be replaced this year.
Okay, then it must have been in that sheet you sent around that showed sort of the schedule for replacing things.
It could have been. I mean, I think that thing, when we bought it, was used, and it doesn't get used a whole lot, but with considering it's used for harbor responses as well as fire department and EMS responses, it's not something you'd want to have to expect to use, be able to rely on getting to someone with. So it does that different, multi-purpose. So I think my guess is it was on there more as a, hey, it's on the horizon. Don't lose sight of this. It's got something that should be out there, unless we want to wait for it to. We do have the reserve, so I mean, if it does go, we do have that cushion to be able to replace it, but we aren't expecting to this year.
You know how big a motor it is?
90 horse.
So how much?
And it's on the public safety, 50,000,
Oh, thank you.
22.
22.
Oh, that's right. I saw it in public safety. Thank you, Margaret.
So the
I remember reading it too.
So in public safety, you said?
Yeah, last line.
Of course, I didn't update those sheets there. So again, that's from Mark's perspective. Yeah, of course, I don't have that in the book. So I mean, we've talked about it. We think we can get another year, but it's just one of those things. I mean, it could be any time. I mean, they had some issues last year, I think, or 2 years ago, with the steering and the connections, and they did get it going again. So it's still there, but we know we're on borrowed time with that thing. I mean, I want to say that's like a 90 something or mid 90s motor, maybe earlier. Can't remember. The town bought the boat in early 2000s. I think someone owned it before he had it. But just something that we're keeping an eye on. If a grant comes along, we're happy to apply for a grant to do that, because it does serve so many purposes in public safety response. Sometimes those can be funded. Sometimes it's challenging to get the attention of the funders because we have such a small population, but wouldn't stop us from trying.
No, the moorings, I think as long as I think you've heard from meetings, as long as you do it island-wise charging, it's going to be a lot easier to sell.
Yeah, we were hoping to have the harbor management plan draft available, but they haven't been able to finish that up yet. So that hopefully is coming sometime this spring. And I think things like that will be included in there. Most likely is that if you do want to generate revenue, here's how many moorings there are, give us a better sense of the, what we might generate. You do look island wide. I mean, just in the harbor and Sands Cove, you're talking what, 200 something moorings. You take it island wide, there must be 500, 600, 700 probably.
Yeah, I mean, you look at, say hurricane, I'll pick on them, they use that float all the time. But if you just charge the moorings in the harbor and the sands, one of the biggest users,
Mhm.
and they got plenty of moorings out there, which they charge for too, so. And the
Well,
third
plus,
way-
plus the Greens Island people.
No, that's gonna be exempt.
So
Give me the
question,
green
when
light.
do we get together again?
In person or
Get more of those
virtually?
numbers filled in?
You clarify?
The total numbers where you don't have we can figure out mill rate changes and you can, know what the school budget's gonna be and all of those good things.
I don't know what their timeline is for the school budget. I don't know if, I guess it'd be good to know, I mean, is your thought and intention to go back and have a different review depending on what the school number is?
I'm hearing it's gonna be a lot, so, I mean, the bottom line is certainly don't wanna do a huge increase all at once. I just
Well, I
would
guess-
like to review when we can answer those questions.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps, maybe you've already got things earmarked, but perhaps you kind of, if that's a concern, go back through the budget before another meeting, with the types of things that you would recommend having, if we need to consider eliminating to do so. I mean, and then we can have that conversation about, what services won't be offered, what equipment will be put off for another year kind of thing. And we can talk too about, probably should talk more about capital projects, things that wouldn't be in the debt service for this budget, because usually the way it's structured is it takes a full year before the payments due from the time you take the loan out. So there wouldn't actually be a payment due on any project we might do next year in this budget.
Okay.
But there are projects we should be talking about needing to do, like paving around the Island Road, making, paving decisions on North Haven Road. I don't think it's any shock or surprise to people that both of those are needing to be done. The cost to do those will probably scare a lot of us. But I don't know what the alternative is unless we want to look at going back to gravel in certain places. So it does then factor in, what is it you think that we should not be doing if we're looking at potentially tens of thousands of dollars to offset those debt service payments in 2 years.
Defund the police.
I mean, just my rough estimate based on past projects, just for surface work, we were pretty close to, if your road's 20 feet wide and you're putting 2 inches of surface down, I should go back and double check, but I think if it was 2 inches of surface, 20 feet wide, I think it was running close to $250,000 a mile. And that's no prep work, that's no reclaiming. Raleigh Island Road, North Haven Road need to be reclaimed. You're at a point where those wheel ruts and rocks that are coming up through, you can't just put an inch over it. You really do have to grind it up. Some of those were never built right to begin with. And it worked for now, and we kind of keep kicking the can. So, using that number and assuming we don't get it anywhere near the rate the state gave us for that bid last year, around the Island Road is probably close to $1 million. North Haven Road will be more if it's longer. But that's no engineer estimate or bid price. That's just based on past projects.
Yeah.
When was the North Haven Road last done?
I think it was like 2007, if I remember being told right. thing was, I think, around the island was about the same time. So if you haven't driven those roads with that kind of frame in mind, maybe before next time we meet, think about some of that. And I know the select board are gonna have to think about it because we have to do something. We're beyond the point of fixing potholes on most of those sections of road. Any other things you want to go over today?
I think I'm all set. And just in light of the total budget and what the impact will be is then, as you said, rethink some of the things that we could change. Postpone.
All right. Well, do you want to try and pencil something in for what, another 2 weeks, say?
Will you have that data then? Not the school, but the other stuff?
No, I don't know if we'll have all the assessing stuff needed to answer those questions by then. The homestead exemptions are due by April 1st, but they might not all be processed by that first full week in April. And surely all the spring work, if you assess what's there on April 1st, for tax purposes, within less than a week's time, we certainly wouldn't have all that. I mean, we don't usually have all that information before the budget process is over. If
Yeah,
I've given numbers in the past, it's usually with those assumptions I mentioned in mind.
yeah. So can we meet the week before you have to have it to go to print so that we can just look and see where we're at that point?
Probably, let me just see when that timing be. So the select board meets again next Tuesday, then likely again on the 13th. I mean, if possible, I don't know, I mean, at the very latest, it'd have to be by the 27th of April that they'd have to approve the warrant. At the very latest. If it can be done sooner, then all the better, but it can't be after the 27th if we're gonna be on time with the printing of the town report for town meeting.
So some pencil in a date sometime the week of the 12th or 19th of April.
Yeah, folks wanna think about the 12th right at the moment, and the next 3 weeks, we might have a lot more by then in terms of at least the school's numbers maybe. I know they've been working on it, but they haven't had any workshops yet. We can circle
I'm
back
good
on
with the
it.
12th.
I'm okay for the 12th.
Yeah, 4
Yeah,
o'clock,
I am too.
4 o'clock or
on
5
Monday-
o'clock.
4 o'clock.
On that Monday, the 12th?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay,
Right,
Thank you.
Thank you.
bye.
Ready?
Thank you.
Thanks.
bye, everybody.
Have a good night.
Bye.